This is Dyslexic Design Thinking. For the past 25 years, Gil Gershoni has been the head of his own branding agency, Gershoni Creative. And one of the things he's passionate about rebranding is his dyslexia. In this series, Gil sits down with members of the dyslexic community for eye-opening conversations about the intersection of dyslexia and creativity, and what dyslexia can teach us about ourselves and the world around us. Today, Gil talks to David Lucchino, an executive entrepreneur and investor in the field of biotechnology. David is the co-founder of Frequency Therapeutics, Sempris Biosciences, and LaunchSite. He serves on the board of Coro Bio and is an advisor to AbPro Corp and Mass General Hospital's Space Medicine Initiative. David also provides opportunities to students through his work with Summer Search and the National Outdoor Leadership School. Enjoy.
It's great to have you here, David.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
For the past 2 decades, you've funded and led some groundbreaking biotechnology companies. Where did this whole start for you?
Well, it's kind of ironic that someone with dyslexia has picked what could be one of the most academically demanding, fields and industries that one could ever imagine. And, somebody who certainly had my ups and downs, particularly earlier in my academic career, in grade school and high school, and even through college. I was someone then who went on and got 2 master's degrees, one in broadcast journalism from Syracuse University's Newhouse School, and then one from MIT Sloan School of Management. So I've always had this chip on my shoulder to not let the world define who I am. Because when I did, I always would end up, in tears, if you will, because instead I had to try to blaze my own trail. But with that, there are natural ups and downs. And so it's a story I hope we'll get to, but, in that process, I was able to meet some folks early in my career that were interested in the life sciences, and they took a chance on me. I took a chance on them, and it's proved to be a 25-year career for me thus far.
Yeah. Well, it's 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic in the US, which is fascinating. What do you love about being an entrepreneur?
I just believe I can solve a problem without having all the resources and information I need at the time to actually solve it. And, I just will figure out a way. If you said another way, if you locked me in the room and said that here's a piece of duct tape, a hanger, and a stapler, but, I need you to build me something, I'm going to figure out how to do it. But if you give me all the pieces in a big direction, in a manual direction to do it, I won't do it because I don't want to read the directions.
Right.
And it's one thing to say that, but now that I've been able to sort of show some success time and time again in my career, that's where I've been able to sort of personal self-esteem points on the board.
In 2006, you co-founded Sempris Biosciences?
Correct. Yeah. Well, at that point, I was just graduating from MIT Sloan School of Management. So here I am. I was living in Boston. I still live in Boston, but I applied to get my MBA at MIT Sloan. And so here you are, the world's leading technical college, university, institute, where numbers rule the day, probably not a home where a lot of dyslexics roam. And so it was during that time that I then got introduced to a really talented PhD student, kind of the anti-dyslexic, if you will. He looks for people that are smart but can solve problems and think in a nonlinear way. Because what you do in the life sciences is really about riddles. And you got to take disparate pieces of information from biology, from chemistry, and so forth, and put them together. And my job wasn't to be the scientist. My job was to work with the scientists, but to be the leader of these organizations, to raise the money, have the right strategy, do the corporate development, think through many of the scientific decisions as part of the senior team, but not be the one who's actually doing the work in the lab. And what I enjoyed about that is you have to be on your A game when you work with these folks, because these are people who are typically well prepared and, talented. And so I have sort of a good sort of inclination of being able to look around corners and ask sort of the right questions strategically at the right time. And so those are the skills that naturally had come out over at Sempris, so here I am for the first time. I'm a CEO of a medical device company, and I go ahead and I get FDA approval on a medical device and European approval on a medical device. I didn't wait for someone to sit there and tell me, can you do this for me? You just kind of had to do it. And I found the right partners to go ahead and do that. And we eventually sold the company successfully, during the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. We raised money and sold the company in 2012. And, for that, I'm proud to have done the work that we did.
Amazing. I love what you were saying, that your ability to see around corners. I think that's something that's so common to a lot of us dyslexic out there, is that, when it comes to looking at letters, we can see through them and above them, and it's very hard to read these non-negotiable characters. But you take the same disability and apply it to everything else as you just described, and you can see around the corners. You can use the same methodology and apply it to anything else and find solutions that traditionally are not apparent to the eye to more maybe linear thinkers.
Yeah. I think if anything, I think two things. I don't say I look around corners because I'm trying to pat myself on the back. It's the experience that I've had being in rooms with other people saying, David, you have the knack of always asking the right question at the right time. And, and then I think the other thing is that when people don't understand my intuition, when I can see things, I have to do two things. I either have to I try to bring people along and help them understand why I'm making this decision. Sometimes I can't do that and I just have to make the decision. But people whose brains don't work that way, sometimes could be a bit surprised at sort of my ability to make some of these decisions that they may think I have not thought through, which isn't the case.
That is very dyslexic. I love that. A few years later, you co-founded another company, Frequency Therapeutics. Tell me about that.
Our primary focus was on being able to restore the hair cells in your ear, which are like little antennas that translate and convert sound into electrical impulses. And there was data that Dr. Langer had that he was on sort of the path to be able to do this. And we took that early data and started a company. And what wound up raising close to $300 million, took the company public, published some early data, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, that showed that this drug worked. But unfortunately ran into bumps as we got to a larger scale of 150 to 180 people, primarily subjectivity, which means that you tell somebody that they're getting a drug to restore their hearing, and then how do you prevent a bias? Because only one of their ears was getting the therapy. And so we hadn't cracked that code. But CBS News did a profile on one of our patients whose hearing we improved. And so I believe that the drug worked, but what I couldn't do is I couldn't prove it the way I wanted to prove it. And that's kind of a summary of 9 years of my life. But, it took a lot of tenacity. And I think having dyslexia has taught me to sort of stay cool and not get too high, not get too low, and just focus on the fundamentals of don't let the world define who you are. Your strategy is good, work hard, and work on delivering what you say you're going to deliver.
In addition to your day job, you work with a number of organizations serving youth in Massachusetts. Tell me more about these organizations. What do you love about volunteering?
Well, I think that one of the things I'm most proud of was I was able to, in the life sciences here in Massachusetts, which is really a global center for all things related to helping and healing people in their lives. There's a really strong trade association called Mass Bio. It's got a few thousand members and very successful. I was able to be chair of that for a number of years. And when I took over as chair, I got some key leaders from the industry together in a room. And I said, I want to try to solve a problem during my tenure. And the problem was, how do you get your foot in the door in the life sciences? I'm in the life sciences and it's still hard to get your foot in the door, if you will. And so we came up with this program called Project On-Ramp, which now 5 or 6 years later has now scaled not just to Boston, but to Philadelphia, San Diego, New York, and has helped over 1,000 kids get their foot in the door in the life sciences. And what makes it interesting is these are kids that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, that go to Worcester State here or Framingham State, who are really talented, but otherwise wouldn't know how to knock on the door of getting into industry. And so what I like to do is I like to bring people together to solve problems and then do it. And that's what my sort of volunteering has been, about with my time. I think just sitting on a board, I'll do that a little bit, but I like to roll up my sleeves and try to have an impact.
You've gone on some big adventures with National Outdoor Leadership School. Tell me a little bit about the organization and some of your adventures.
So the National Outdoor Leadership School is based in Lander, Wyoming. Knowles is about a 60-year-old organization, and what it focuses on is wilderness education. They pride themselves. You could show up at their headquarters in Lander, Wyoming, in your pajamas, and they'll be able to get you outfitted properly and then start to teach you in small groups how to live and function with your team in the outdoor setting. So it uses the uncertainty of the outdoors, weather, rain, bugs, sun, access to, water. It's not a survival school by any means, but what it does is it mimics what you have to deal with in life. And it uses the outdoors as a way to teach you about that. So one saying they have is this idea of expedition behavior. You're in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, or you're up in Alaska, or you're trekking through India with Knowles. You're there and you could have a meltdown and you could be frustrated, but that's not going to do you any good. You're still responsible for walking yourself out and working with the team that you have around you. And I first did this when I was 19 or 20 as a semester program. I lived 95 days in the outdoors. Then I did a climb on Denali, where my expedition was able to summit Denali, with the tallest peak in North America. Then I did rafting down the Salmon River in Idaho. And I think all along the way, there's different levels of intensity, but the same message applies. Positive attitude, preparation, working closely with people in dynamic environments. And that was a natural thing for me to be drawn to.
I want to go back to the beginning of your dyslexia journey. Tell me, how old were you when you were diagnosed with dyslexia?
Well, I pulled out the sheet from the supervising clinical and educational psychologist who diagnosed me. And so I guess this has to be probably around 1975. And there was a whole synopsis done on me. My parents did that for all three of their kids to sort of get a baseline sense of where they are. And for some reason, I have the original letter and I've always held on to it, not always understanding what it meant. So here's this assessment. And within the second sentence, the PhD is telling me I'm at least above average intelligence. And I'm like, at least above average intelligence. I'm like, oh, okay, at least above average intelligence. And it kept sort of saying it back and forth. And, for so much of my early education, certainly in school, Catholic school, I felt I was at least below average intelligence, flaming out in my foreign language classes, not having trouble with my writing, having trouble with my phonics, with my spelling, with understanding, the memorization around my science classes. And so that was kind of a real seminal shift within me emotionally. And it didn't heal the wounds. I still carried a chip on my shoulder, but I'm like, hell yeah, I'm at least above average intelligence, according to this person who I actually have been in touch with. And so here's the funny thing. The person that did this evaluation was the person who I sent that business plan to when I was looking at getting into the life sciences at launch site. And because I was still seeing him professionally and I trusted judgment, who lived next door to Tom Petzinger, who was the person that was starting launch site as he was leaving the Wall Street Journal, which was the small biomedical investment fund.
Wow, so many similarities from my experience as well. I also remember being diagnosed and they said a very similar thing, above average intelligence, but reading and writing, I was below average intelligence. But any other sort of matrix of measurement, they're like, wow, off the charts for his age group. And I think a lot of us, when they do go to take it to test, kind of experience some of that insight because, dyslexia has nothing to do with the IQ. It's just the way we look at the world and we process and we think about things. And it's quite unique and gifted way. I remember my mom used to tell me when I was a little boy, you are so smart, you're so intelligent. Every mother will say it to her kids, So she said, okay, let's go take your IQ test. And that's how I got to get mine. I wish I had a little piece of paper like you because I would have framed it because, the stigma sticks with you, right? I mean, even though you know how brilliant you are, you still know that no matter how hard you try to do things that come very easily to others, you can't do it the way they do. And my goal in life was to be average. I just wanted to be average. If I can make it there with so much effort And then I realized that that sort of early years of education that I tried so hard paid in spades later on because I've learned how to work. I've learned how to apply myself. After the diagnosis, were there any other resources available to you that sort of helped you?
My parents had me do, yeah, I mean, I would leave school a little bit early and I would work with the counselor for a number of years after the diagnosis. But that was more in grade school. When I got to a little bit, when I got to middle school and high school, I was kind of on my own. I probably would have benefited from, an additional year of schooling and education. But, I went to a fine school. It's very good, Denison University in Ohio, and, got my way through there. But it was funny. It wasn't until I got into the work world that I started seeing a counselor. And then this woman, Linda Katz, became president of the small school up in Vermont called Landmark College, which works with people
Mhm.
who have dyslexia. There's a Landmark school here in Massachusetts, and one of the founders of that went on to found Landmark College. And so I quit my job at 24, I guess it's 24 or 25, and was going to spend a semester at Landmark. Just sort of, I did everything from college level classes to doing third grade phonics that I just never learned, and wound up staying a year. And I think that really gave me a lot of confidence. I did very well there. I just focused on the opportunity.
When you were going through that experience, where did encouragement come from?
Well, it's a good question. I think I had pretty strong self esteem by that point.
Hmm.
And, my friends all had their jobs and were doing this and doing that. But, I felt like I had a pretty good plan. My parents were supportive, and no one was criticizing me. I kind of wanted to, I mean, what did I'd worked for 3 years in a marketing job. Then I had quit. I did the climb on Alaska and Denali, and then I went back to Landmark for the year. Then I came out and then did odd jobs, fly to Syracuse, got in. Actually, I do remember taking a prep class to take the GMATs for business school. And just, I remember just sort of like breaking down and crying after my first class because, like, I'm not going to do well taking the GMATs. It
Hmm.
just wasn't going to happen. And here I was, like a 24-year-old crying in my mother's arms because I felt so defeated. But again, I found a program, oddly enough, at MIT where they didn't require GMATs. It was for people who had sort of, more seasoned experience. And so I always sort of will have had a knack of finding a way, not immediately, but eventually to find a place that's authentic to me. But it requires me sort of taking off the training wheels and having to go out and try to figure it out on my own.
When did it click for you that your dyslexia was a positive rather than a negative?
Well, I think I became proud to be dyslexic with the more success I had in the business world. I think I'm open to talk about it because I think I've done some pretty substantial things. And so I think once I graduated from MIT, I jumped into starting a company. It was wild. I think, as that process went on, I wouldn't sort of wear it on my sleeve, but I kind of knew it. And again, as we were successful, to start a company from scratch, to get FDA approval, to sell it successfully and make your investors money is not a trivial thing. And so I had working closely with Bob Langer and Chris Luce, who saw me for, like, these folks are super talented and they could work with anybody they wanted, and they wanted to work with me, and they saw my talent and ability, and they saw how I balanced out things, and I think that was a big step in all of that as well. Sort of the people that I trusted,
Hmm.
and then the final thing was when I was starting Frequency, I had a phenomenal lead investor and chair who really just like he was really, he went to Stanford undergrad and, super smart, super successful, sold his company that he started from the ground up for, north of $1 billion. And not that that's the metric, but just to help people give a sense of, but he was a really good guy. And I'm convinced he had some sort of dyslexic as well. And one of the biggest heartbreaking things was he wound up getting COVID and passing away halfway through running this company, Frequency. And I found this person, Mark Cohen, who like just loved me and like for the first time was just accepted me and understood me and how my brain worked because his worked in a similar way. And he was a high achieving guy. And so when he passed away, that was, so I feel lucky for the time that I had with him. And that gave me a
Hmm.
lot of confidence. but I feel, sad that, I lost a friend and somebody who was a real, I guess, mentor and role model for me.
Yeah.
And so, those are the different things that happen along the way for me to continue to be, accepting of my LD.
And I'm glad that you had that connection. I mean, some people go for the whole life and don't have even one of them. And it sounds like you have so many of them in your life. So very, very fortunate.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. I know that some of the things that I always focus in order to sort of celebrate my dyslexia, usually I kind of refer to it as feed my dyslexia, dance with my dyslexia, is part of my process to be able to understand that it's not a disability, but it's a hyperability if I learn to have a relationship with it. How do you dance with your dyslexia?
Well, I think in a way it gives me a superpower. And if I use it effectively and tune into it, and like looking around corners is one example. I'm not guaranteed, but I have to be open to it and allow my natural skills to come out. I think when Malcolm Gladwell came out with his book, How David Beats Goliath, which
Hmm.
talks about, a series of people who are super successful, David Boies, Gary Cohen, who was at Goldman Sachs. I know I'm forgetting other people, Charles Schwab. Here are people that, you know, having dyslexia requires you to be a bit of a hustler and to sort of try to bend the rules in your favor.
Hmm.
And these are all examples of people that did that. Then finally, I think, somebody like, he was a Harvard ed professor. He talked about the theories of multiple intelligence. Howard Gardner. So Howard Gardner was a professor at Harvard who in the 70s started pushing this idea, which I happen to support and believe, the theories of multiple intelligence. So it's not just you're one person. There's many pieces to your levels of intelligence. And, some people learn through movement. Some people learn through, verbal discourse. Some people are good with sort of, their eyes. I'm not giving it justice here, but the point is you could be smart in a way that's not currently being measured. And so I kind of put all these different things together over the course of time, and they kind of help me weave a support system within me to always remind me what I do and who I am is unique and is intelligent. But none of this happens without hard work, without taking risks. The world's not going to come to you just because you have dyslexia. You're not entitled to anything. You
That's
just
right.
gotta. You're going to fail, and you're going to try things. You're going to fail, but you're used to failure, but you don't accept failure, and you keep going.
What's some of the secret to your success in schools and any tips you may want to give some of our listener out there as they're struggling through that process?
I think certainly my early years, grade school, middle school, high school, had my ups and downs. I actually got an award when I was a senior in high school from the Pittsburgh newspaper, and they were featuring the all-star achievers, and I got selected as one because I took my GPA from like a 75 up to a whatever it was, 89 or 90. And there's something about being the underdog and being the most improved that I've mastered in my life. And I found a way of becoming acknowledged alongside other people who did it a little bit differently from me. But I would say the key for it was the more I matured as a person, the more effective I was as a student. And that just took time. And I was never
Mm.
going to, and so I got my master's degree in journalism from Syracuse when I was 27. It was a 12-month program. And I got my MBA from MIT Sloan when I was 36. And that was a 12-month program. Pretty intense 12-month program, very intense. But,
Mhm, mhm.
I was mature enough. My skills had developed enough that I was able to appreciate the opportunity, focus on what I did well, and then what I didn't do well, just sort of figure out a way to sort of get through them.
I think that a lot of our audience, and I think dyslexic at large, I mean, really have different experiences. One thing it's very important to know that dyslexia is not one thing. It's an umbrella and it's a spectrum like everything else out there. And I'm always interested to hear, especially with such success and so much education on your end, like your successes and trials and tribulations and how did you arrive where you are? How has it been the reactions of fellow dyslexic to your journey? I mean, have you got some sort of additional sort of conversation support? Tell me a little bit about how has that been for you?
Yeah, I think, having gone to Landmark College after I got my bachelor's degree, before I got my two master's degrees, was helpful. And I've developed a little bit of a community of people from there. and that's been good. I have a friend of mine, Aaron Wolf, who started a I Am Able Foundation,
Hmm.
and for dyslexia. He lives in Los Angeles, and so it's fun to see different people doing different things who have sort of self-identified as having this, as sort of being dyslexic. And it's fun to see because a lot of times they're doing pretty unique and spectacular things. I mean, I think some of the folks that you get to hang out with, Gil, also represent that. Again, I think a lot of these people have to realize in their own way, you can't let the world define you. If you want it, you got to go get it.
Hmm.
And you're going to fail, but you just keep going and you're going to figure it out. So as I think about a community of people, that's really what I've been focused on. I guess now that I have two kids, I think I have anxiety around how they learn. And, I don't want to put my anxiety on them by any means.
Right.
But, I worry about, okay, are they, and I've got my one son tested and doesn't have LD. And both of the boys you could tell are very smart, but they all have the unique abilities. So you want to focus on that, but you never want to forget, you want to raise happy, healthy, kids who feel loved. And I think, a lot of this I don't want to say will take care of itself, but will come out in due course. I think the advancements that our system of education has made, particularly in private schools, unfortunately, not so much in public schools or many public schools, has been pretty good. And so I think the way I also deal with this is I look to send them to not like the best schools, but schools that are, have both feet on the ground and are, in the case here in Boston, private, where they can get the type of diversity of learning methods and learning styles that are going to benefit them.
What advice would you give somebody who is interested in working in the biotech industry or in the VC world? Any sort of pointers that you might give somebody that's trying to get into that world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, embrace who you are. It requires a lot of hard work. I mean, what I wasn't going to do was, I was not going to be hired because I was a great scientist. That wasn't going to be my path. But I got hired because I was, I think, a very good, leader and CEO who could work very effectively in the scientific realm. And so I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's going to be my bias. And I worked for a venture capital firm, and a lot of the folks that were doing the life science investing at the time didn't know what to do with me because I wasn't a PhD in molecular biology.
Right.
But I went on to start, two companies that were successful. I think from the VC standpoint, VCs is, there's a lot of work of cranking out spreadsheets and models. That's not what I would gravitate towards. I'd gravitate towards the people with the ideas, partnering with them, the quality of what I could bring to their entities, and through my experiences would be kind of, if you're interested in the VC world, that would be what I would focus on. For me to sit there and do spreadsheets, I'm not going to impress anybody. And so really figuring out what you do well and and it's not always easy, but trying to find an opportunity where that could be put on display. I mean, the one thing we didn't touch on was about 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma, and they caught it really early. But I get treated for that, and it's successful, and it stayed in check. But it's still a journey, being a cancer survivor and having to sort of navigate that on top of running companies and having a family and doing all the other things that you do. So you just learn to take it all in stride and see what you can do. So it's all good, just take one day at a time. And I think what I'm attracted to are people who I like and who seem to like me, as opposed to people who are just doing things.
I'm glad that your health is doing better and that your career is thriving. And I really, really appreciate your time today. This has been so insightful, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. Really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed our conversation today, be sure to subscribe to this series wherever you get your podcasts. Visit dyslexicdesignthinking.com to learn more about our latest initiatives, including Dear Dyslexia, the Postcard Project, or to book Gil to speak at your next event or conference. Stay connected on Instagram at Dyslexic Design Thinking, or drop us a line at dyslexic@gershoni.com to receive our monthly newsletter and learn more about our upcoming programming. Dyslexic Design Thinking is produced by Gershoni Creative. Until next time, Be well.